This is Dragons After Dark, and welcome to the Pet Battle Report, your weekly news and information source for all things Pet Battle. This week, we'll be going over some of the more popular strategies for pet battles for single pet and multi-pet teams. Before we get into that though, let's go over everything going on this week on Azeroth and Beyond for your pets. The Ultimate Cuddly Pack that Blizzard released last week is still going and will be until the 27th of February. Don't stress too much if you've been bitten by that FOMO bug though. There are multiple sales a year and they generally include the shop pet. So if this 21 pack is too pricey for you, don't be afraid to wait for the next go around. Speaking of shop pets, as part of the next round of Trading Post rewards data mined by Wowhead, it looks like we might be seeing a couple of retired shop pets coming in. The Pandaren Monk and Little Ragnaros come up as potential rewards, along with Eggbob and Pippin, who are recolors of pets we can already own in-game. As of right now, it looks like they'll be going for 650 Traders Tenders, which is down from the 750 for Garlock, but keep in mind this is data mining and the information is subject to change. I think it's great that we're seeing retired pets and mounts come to the Trading Post, especially for those who may not want to purchase items from the store, don't have the funds, and/or weren't around when these pets were available. But what do you think? Do you like seeing shop pets in the Trading Post? Other than that, it's a pretty quiet week on live servers for pet battles. We have the Venthyr Assault in the Maw until Friday, which rewards no pets, but that will be switching over to the Night Fae on the Friday evening reset, which has the Invasive Buzzer as a drop chance from the Assault cache, and if you're still looking to get your infused Ether Worm, keep your fingers crossed for a Shady Place quest to come up, since the treasure it drops from is a Rift treasure. Enzoth is again assaulting the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, which means you can farm the Forgotten for the Cuddly Pet and the Will of Enzoth for the Corrupted Tentacle. While over in Uldum, we have the Akir Assault happening in the first half of the week, with Skixtraz potentially dropping the Akir Tunneler, and the same for Lord Ashkarai with Rot Breath. The Akir Assault will only run until Friday evening reset, at which point it changes over to the Amatet Assault, which drops no pets. Keeping it with Battle for Azeroth, if you're still working on many fine heroes, for your rebuilt Mechanical Spider and rebuilt Gorilla Bot, set your alarms and program your coffee maker, because the next assault will start at an eye-opening 4 a.m. PST on Friday and end at 11 a.m. PST the same day. As for the BFA Islands for the week, they are Skittering Hollow, Snowblossom Village, Havens Wood, and the salvage is Molten K, Snowblossom, and Whispering Reef. Our last bit of news isn't for this week, but as they say, preparation is the key to success. On March 4th, NA servers will have their first Super Squirt event since 26 August 2021. Our calendar was jostled a bit when Legion Time Walking was added, but as part of Dragonflight's pet battle discussion, the WoW team has expressed they'd like to help make Super Squirt come up more often for their players. So, get your teams and leveling queues ready, NA, and if you'd like to participate in Super Squirt, but you don't know how, you can check out last week's podcast for how to get your garrison ready to go. That's it for the news for the week. Remember, if you're looking for information on what's available each day, you can check out the daily reports Remsy and I create, then put out on my Twitter, the NA Pet Battle forums, and in a few Pet Battle Discords. Anyway, let's get into the most popular types of strategies for single pet and multi-pet teams. Let's start with the single target strategies. I won't go over every single type, of course, but most of them boil down to 4 types: Explode, Murder the Innocent, Shatter Defenses, and Dot. These types can stand alone on their own to defeat the enemy, but sometimes you'll see strategies combining 2 or more of them. The first one we'll go over is Explode, which also can include Burst. Explode is arguably one of the most useful strategies versus single target enemies because it ignores the 50% reduction in damage buff that almost, if not all, single target enemies have. This is great when you're working with a reasonable sized health pool for the enemy because you can hit the maximum amount of damage that's available to do to them, which is usually capped at 35% due to that boss buff. Explode works off your pet's health, not their power, so put away those power breeds of Iron Starlets and bring in your health breeds, because it does damage equal to 40% of their HP. As an example, the Mechanical Pandaren Dragonling's Explode will hit for 560, since that's 40% of its 1400 health pool. The downfall of this strategy comes in when the health pool of the enemy exceeds what damage your first two pets can do with attacks and Explode, combined with whatever damage your third pet can do, which is when we move into the Murder the Innocent approach. Murder the Innocent is an ability introduced with the pet Ball and has been expanded to one other pet since then with Death Seeker. This ability also ignores the 50% reduction in damage buff, but instead of working off your pet's health, it works based on the enemy's. Murder the Innocent will hit for 30% of the enemy's health, which makes it exceptionally good for enemies with large health pools like Swag. The downside to Murder the Innocent is it's not as widely available as Explode, since only 2 pets currently have it, and those 2 pets have varying degrees of difficulty in obtaining said pet. Ball requires a very lengthy and somewhat difficult quest chain that includes going through a couple of quest chains with a whole other pet. It's a whole ordeal. Death Seeker is far more accessible, but comes at the price of having to do Torghast, so let you be the judge on which one you'd rather farm there. As an honorable mention, you can also use Life Exchange, which also ignores the 50% damage reduction buff and equalizes the health between your pet and the enemy. Of the 3 abilities, this one can be the trickiest to pull off because you usually need to time getting your health as low as possible without dying to use this ability effectively. And it doesn't work as well with enemies that have lower end of the health pool for single targets. Our next strategy isn't one ability in particular, but the debuff applied by a wide range of abilities, Shattered Defenses. Ever since this debuff received a debuff, or rather a nerf, from 100% damage increased down to 50% in Shadowlands pre-patch, it's not quite as impactful as it used to be, but it's still a viable strategy. The 50% debuff effectively negates the 50% reduction in damage buff most of these enemies have, and depending on the enemy, no changes were needed to some strategies beyond adding a regular attack or 2. How it combined with damage modifiers like Black Claw was also changed, but it's still an effective go-to with Icky and the Zandalari Raptors being favorite pets for this in the community. For me, I prefer the SS or speed breed of Foul Feather for speedier enemies, or if it's not versus anything with flying attacks, I like the Chitterspine Skitterlings from Nazjatar. The last method is one that can be combined with Shattered Defenses but can stand alone as well. Dots. With the right pets, you can set up an effective team to chunk down on the enemy's health, especially if that team includes damage modifiers like Black Claw. A good example of this is Bone Shard and Icky. Even without Shattered Defenses from Flock, the Blistering Cold and Chop Dots combined with Black Claw can eat through anything with ease as long as they don't have a cleanse ability on the enemy. That's where we saw this type of strategy fall by the wayside a bit this expansion with enemies like Swag and Stormamu, since both those enemies have a cleanse that will clear your dots and damage modifiers before they can really build up momentum. And that's it for the single target strategies. As I said, this isn't a complete list, just the base of the pyramid you can build your pet teams and their potential strategies with. That brings us to our pet spotlight for the week with the Crimson Spore. Since we went over Explode strategies, I thought it'd be a good time to mention this pet. While it's mostly the mechanical pets known for the Explode ability, what's nice about the Crimson Spore is it's a flyer with Explode, which means it gets a speed boost while above 50% HP and will outspeed most enemies. Not all of them, but most of them. It's still a slow flyer when it loses its flying debuff at 260. This can cut down on the time of a fight since it's faster and sometimes won't give the enemy time to do an attack animation. It also has the most health out of all the flyers with Explode, sitting at 1,725 HP, putting its Explode ability at a whopping 690 damage. Being faster also means you can use the Blinding Powder ability to keep the Crimson Spore and or your team from being hit by an attack, especially an AoE one. There isn't much more to this pet, and it's kind of a one ability pet, but its flying racial buff and health pool means this pet can pack a big hit with that one ability before the enemy has time to do anything about it. Now let's get into the multi-target strategies. As you can imagine, most of the strategies above can also be applied to multi-target enemies, but depending on the fight, this will limit their viability, like with Shattered Defenses, Explode, and Murder the Innocent. Some of these things take too long to set up, or the combination of their individual abilities, like Toxic Smoke with the Iron Starlet, won't do enough damage in combination with Explode to bring the enemy's health low enough. You kind of get the picture. It's also going to depend on whether you're looking to make a leveling strategy or not, since it'll cut out a pet that's available for you to use. My two favorite types of multi-target strategies for non-leveling teams are AoE and what we'll call bomb teams. AoE is pretty self-explanatory, and when I'm first testing a fight, my go-to is usually Anomalous. You can use Anomalous in a couple of ways, like using Toxic Fumes to make Poison Protocol around longer, or you can go all in on the AoE and slot Void Nova and Poison Protocol. Those two combined with Corrosion in slot 1 means you can effectively remove a good portion of health from the entire team, and with double Anomalous, your final pet usually won't have much to clean up. Anomalous isn't the only AoE option though. I also like using Blight Breath with their Acid Rain and Dreadful Breath, or some of the Wasps from Shadowlands with Great Sting and Enrage, especially against critters. There are quite a few great AoE abilities to choose from. You just need to find the right fit for the enemy team you're fighting. Bomb teams are what I'll use to refer to teams that have a damage buff ability plus something that hits like, well, a bomb. While not a direct relation of the Howl Bomb, it has its roots there. This is where you'll do a 1-to-1 strat. One pet with a big hit combo that'll take out the other pet. So if you're going against two flyers and a beast, you could do Gizmo with Prowlin Arcane Dash, Chrominius with Howlin Surge of Power, then one of the microbots with Supercharge and Ion Cannon. This is a no-fuss approach, though it can be limited by what the composition of the enemy team is, and you need to be able to make a swap without your pet taking too much damage before it can set its attack up if your other pet is not taking enough damage to die and you get the free swap in. For leveling strategies against multi-targets, you're going to want a combination of everything we discussed above, including the single target strats. I usually try to use Explode when making a leveling strat. That way my level pet never has to come in, so it's not in any danger. This means I need my first pet to either get the enemy team low with AoE, so my Explode pet just has to do a hit or two to finish each enemy, then explode on the last, or I need a pet that can basically solo 2/3 or almost all of the enemy team so that my Explode pet only has to fight the last enemy until its health is in the Explode range. There's also the 1.5 to 1.5 strategies, where each pet takes on an equal share of the enemy, with the level pet swapping in usually when the first pet dies before being swapped back out. You can also use the leveling pet to strategically eat non-damage abilities like stuns and damage modifiers if there's no AoE. The point is, there are tons of options for how you craft your strategies. It just takes some knowledge of the enemy team and what you have available for your roster. But that's it for popular strategy types. Do you have a particular favorite? Let me know in the comments below. In light of everything we talked about today, our featured strategy is one that uses 3 of the single target approaches and the featured pet. We're once again featuring Mutanus with their 6-round strategy against Swog in the Waking Shores. Their strat uses Murder the Innocent from Deathseeker, Life Exchange from Mini Mindslayer, and Explode from the Crimson Spore to give you a quick 38-second win against this fearsome frog. A big thank you to Mutanus for this quick, elegant strat. Now that we've gone over how you can approach making strategies, you might want to download our featured add-on for the week, Rematch by Jello. Rematch is an invaluable add-on for anyone who wants to do pet battles. It saves your teams, and you can have multiple tabs for said teams. I have one for each expansion, that way I'm not mixing up my Dragonflight and BFA teams, and I personally would not be able to create a lot of my strategies without its expanded filtering system for finding the perfect pets to defeat my enemies. So a big thank you to Jello for creating this invaluable add-on for the community. This podcast is a little quicker than the one last week. week. I tried to stay more on script this week. That way I wasn't doing a whole lot of filler or slow talking, which is what happens when I don't know what I'm going to say next. It's one of the things I was taught to do in speech and debate is when you don't know what you're going to say next, you slow down your speech or you just pause, but you can't pause for too long. It's a whole thing. If there are any topics you'd like to see me cover on the podcast, this was just something I kind of threw together today as I was going through and looking at what we had coming up for this week. I just kind of was like, well, we'll go over some popular strategies that people can do and maybe put together themselves, because that's sort of my introduction to creating strategies, right? I started looking at Wowhead and got very frustrated with Wowhead. No shade to Wowhead about this whole situation, but the comment sections don't lend well to if a fight gets any changes or if an ability gets any changes, anything like that. It's not the best system. Thankfully, I happened across Xufus on a Google search and I have never really looked back. I do post my strategies on Wowhead as well. However, the bulk of everything I do is on Xufus. But before I ever started making strategies, what I did was I looked up other people's strategies, used them, and was like, wow, these people are magical. I can't believe someone came up with something like this. And once I started doing more and more of the fights and I gained an understanding of how the fights worked and how certain things interacted, I realized that a lot of the strategies used the same 10 to 15 pets. And at this point, I think I probably had a little over 600. I'd passively collected about 500 before I really got into pet battling. When you have that many pets, but you're only using 10 to 15, it just seemed kind of like a waste to me, if that makes sense. I can completely understand not using every single pet because we have a lot of reskins. Like, we have a lot of snakes, we have a lot of bunnies, one bunny is as good as the next, pretty much. So I can understand not using every single one of the pets, but there were a lot that I thought were pretty decent that weren't being used. And just because we're talking about something that's rarer than a bunny doesn't mean it's not valid for a strategy. And I'm not talking about BlizzCon pets here. I'm talking about drop pets from particular bosses and things of that nature. So that's kind of my origin story for strategy creation, was I wanted to see more pets being used in strategies, because what's the point in having so many pets and having a pet battling system if you're not going to use most of them? I hope that the breakdown here has inspired some of you to maybe go out and try to make some of your own strategies for a fight. If that's something you'd like me to go over, how I make strategies, I would be happy to do that in a podcast or in a video. That might work a little better. There's really not a whole lot to it. It kind of just comes down to the sheer amount of time you spend doing this stuff, but that's pretty much anything in this game, right? PvP, Mythic rating, Mythic plus. You get better as you spend more time doing it and your knowledge of certain features expands. You go from following guides to understanding why the guides are using certain abilities and things of that nature, and that's pet battles. That's all it is. So maybe go out and try something new and add a strategy to Xufus or Wowhead if that's your preference. As I said, no shade. But that's going to be it for me this week. I'll have all the pertinent links available on my tweet for the podcast, as well as in the description once it's uploaded to YouTube. Until next time, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day or night, and happy battling!